Hey, welcome back. So it's that time of the year again, where it's the end of the year. And as always, I want to tell you about the cool build systems I played with this year. Kind of like a Game of the Year video, but specifically for the parts of games where you make builds and get your playstyle on. Before we get started, I just want to thank you, folks that have come aboard with us this year or who've been along with us for a while. It was a bumpy ride for me, and all of you recommended many of the games I enjoyed the most this year. So thank you very much for joining me and, to be blunt, for helping me through that. We may not be friends, we are more like colleagues, but I am sure lucky you all were here. I'm simply very grateful for your support. I'm Zandy. Happy New Year. Honorable mentions. Quite a few this year. I'll start by following up on my honorable mentions from last year's video, because they both kind of had a floating question with them last time and I want to address those. So this is Limbus Company. Not a lot to say here. I just did enjoy making builds in this game a lot in 2024, just as I did in 2023. Because Limbus Company works with this system where each character takes one identity, a version of themselves you'll use for this battle, so those are the 6 you can see for my 6 characters on my team. And then a set of ego, one of each tier. Those are the special powerful attacks you were just seeing to work into your tactics. Because this system works on that rather high opportunity cost, where let's say for Mersault, any of your given 12 sinners, you're picking between one of their identities. They're all competing with each other, very high opportunity cost. And then all of their ego, at least of each tier, are competing with each other. So, only one of these 3 ego of that tier. As the game grows and more stuff comes out, the opportunity cost increases a lot, and more than the maximum number of sinking units that are good that you can fit on a team exist, for example. I mention that just because the primary concern I had when I brought this game up last year is that a lot of the good or functional stuff in the game is a bit obvious, and so it runs the risk of being a little boring if you're good at coming up with build concepts. I would say, if anything, that's been getting better over the years, so I think you could have a very good time jumping in here if you want to spelunk around and put together some pretty crunchy, pretty complex, lots of moving parts kind of builds like this. I've had a very good time with Limbus Company last year and this year. Okay, and then Baldur's Gate 3. I'd said I wanted to see how it felt later in the game when you have gear and such fully stocked. I wanted to see the whole build system set up first. It's a long game. A lot of people taking their time wouldn't have gotten to this part of the game yet when I mentioned it last year. So I said, let me take my time recommending this, but I've taken my time now. Yes, good. I thought that was very fun overall. I really like these little packages of items that support certain playstyles. So these gloves and these 2 rings all kind of do things to benefit using cantrips to supplement your normal combat or attacking with weapons. And they're kind of all good on their own, but they also synergize together. They did a really good job carefully balancing it. So I like these items on their own, but they're also cool if you equip them all together. Just great. If you don't find them all, it's still fun to have any of them in any combination. Not that not that I would know, but anyway, there's a whole bunch of these. So there's some for thunder and lightning damage, for example. There's a bunch. They're really, really cool. I made a ton of extremely aggressively multi-classic builds, like 3 or 4 multi-classes for every member of the cast, including a very memorable playthrough with this lass, who was designed as kind of the ultimate skill monkey. She's sort of better than everybody else at every out-of-combat thing, and then in combat we have the greatest hits library of support effects in Baldur's Gate 3 to make the other party members' builds as potent as possible. Yeah, I'd say this gets a re-recommendation from me. Baldur's Gate 3 is time-consuming to play, but I thought that time was richly rewarding, and you may have a very good time making builds here, with or without people to play co-op with. I enjoyed both a whole lot. Actually, just one other quick thing about Baldur's Gate 3. If you play tabletop Dungeons & Dragons or other tabletop role-playing games, this personally helped my group a lot. Like, my players are better players from playing this. I think because the abstract idea of what you have to do in a turn was made more concrete by the game's action system. Just to say, if you play tabletop role-playing games, I even more highly recommend that you also play this. I wouldn't not play this just because you have like a group in person to play with. That's awesome, but I would still definitely play this. All right, new honor honorable mentions. The finals. Technically, this game came out at the very end of 2023, but I'm just telling you about what I played this year, not necessarily games from this year. It's pretty beneficial to wait to play newly released games and go play some of your backlog instead, so I'd go so far as to say who cares what recently came out. Anyway, this is a small team-size first-person shooter with destructible terrain and a bunch of different game modes, as you can probably infer. And more importantly for our purposes, it has a tightly opportunity cost-filled loadout system with only 3 slots and all these options. Ooh, talk dirty to me. Take me out to dinner first. I mean, the unlock system is a little slower than I would like. Certainly that has been a bit of a pain, but I mean, it's a free-to-play game and the pace is alright. And you can switch classes and loadouts mid-match in quick play mode too. This is just a somewhat normal player versus player experience that you might especially enjoy if you like making loadouts and switching between them, which I do a lot. Warframe Companion Update Part 2. Okay, so Warframe is a third-person Space Ninja situation where a lot of loot drops, and a lot of that loot is or becomes build options for your Space Ninja, pictured here in a glorious magenta. And that Space Ninja gets a companion, a robot, turret buddy, or a doggo, or a cat, or what have you, that you can use a similar build system to augment. Those are similarly customizable. So what's happened here is that they've rebalanced all of the beast companions and also the robotic companion weapons. This item is a very large balance update, but in practice it's an enormous wave of buffs for a large chunk of the game that was previously just kind of behind the times. It's almost as if they just now added in basically dozens of good companion options. How they did that is really interesting, but we don't need to get into it here. Oh, look, just the first part of this update was one of my build system things of the year, last year, so this won't win a spot again, but I think it's great, and if you've ever liked making builds in Warframe, I think that part of the game is eaten good lately. I'll mention Balatro here as an extremely successful game that certainly gets you setting up a build of sorts, but I don't think this game's build system itself is all that special. It's functional, it does what it has to do, provokes the imagination, and that's awesome. I personally liked but didn't love Balatro. I just think that those of you more game design minded may like to take note of this game's success with me. We can use this information to our advantage in the future. It's good to know people are up for this sort of thing at the moment. Rabbit and Steel. This is a tab-targeting MMORPG-style boss rush game set up with a roguelike gameplay loop, so in just one sit-down, you fully gear up, upgrade your abilities, and try to clear through a ton of boss encounters like this, before probably dying, and then you can try run again, things reset. So it's a very condensed version of that raiding type of gameplay loop that normally takes months and requires you to get a second family worth of internet folks together to even attempt it. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. I had a great time doing just that when I played World of Warcraft years ago. I'm just saying you, statistically, don't have time now to do that, and this is a way to have some of that experience in 1/2 hour. You can play it co-op. The upgrades for every single ability, at least that I've read through, are interestingly balanced effects. You kind of end up placing bets on what kind of loot you think will pay off later. It's a weird, but I think engaging build experience that you can play with friends. I just thought a lot of you might like that. We certainly don't have a ton of those. Wait, what's this game doing here? Are you picking up on my increased focus on build system stuff you can enjoy with friends this year? You are, huh? Right, good talk. Remnant II. We have a gunslinging, build-swapping, dodge-rolling, multiplayer semi-randomized dungeon buster on our hands. To get this out of the way, I really dislike the way that items are hidden in this game. I think it clashes with the internet age, where you can forevermore just look things up. So like if there's some build option you want and it's hidden behind some puzzle, you will soon realize you can just look it up and that you may not get the chance to acquire it again anytime soon, at random, and therefore you probably should look it up if you want to play with it. And this can become a bit of a mind worm. Like, I think that's a little tedious for the right or wrong kind of person. And I guess I'm the wrong kind of person. I just think that having some build options hidden this way means that players will sometimes not be able to enjoy making a build without being subjected to this weird scavenger hunt. So it's almost like you have to like both for either one to be enjoyable. I do think that is a flaw of sorts with this game. But even that single complaint is probably not going to be an issue for most of you because you get so much stuff in this game. A lot of games that have a sort of linear progression, a campaign structure where you progress through levels or a couple hour, a dozen hour long story, if they also have build systems, they run into this thing where you don't have all of the slots on your loadout, if you will, full until toward the end of the campaign. That's kind of how they do power progression. And as a result, the opportunity cost, at least, the pressure put on each of your build decisions, 4 rings, your amulet, your weapons, and their mods in this game, isn't fully online until, very late in the game. But Remnant 2 gets these slots filled really, really fast, like a couple of hours, and then it just keeps going. Someone on the development team just really liked to draw rings. I can't believe it took that long to scroll down. I was trying to do a bit. And it's not just a lot of options to have a lot of options. Beside there being a lot of, I guess, niches that you can build into for something like mods or a certain type of weapon or status effects or whatever, you also have enough options that just generally provide decent benefits. Thus, if you have a slot open and there aren't more rings that support a really specific playstyle you've chosen, there's always stuff that is good, and there kind of is still pressure on that open slot. There's still going to be things that are generally powerful. Of course, that's not to even begin to discuss the loadout system in this game. Hold me back, I want this in every single game from now on. You click and you get a completely different build, and you've got 8 of them, and it's magic. This is also no mere gimmick that allows you to switch builds quickly. Having random boss modifiers switches up the campaign experience. And would you look at that, we have a ton of builds with which to counter those random boss modifiers. So if one were to come along that specifically hard countered one build, you've got 7 more right there. So don't take my snarky scavenger hunt comment too seriously. I just wanted to have all of the stuff as soon as possible so I could enjoy playing more of the game with a variety of fully realized builds. And that's a subjective problem. I think many people just won't experience or care as much about that as I did. And you can certainly make builds very, very early on. That was my point in the previous section. So I think it's mostly fine. I might imagine this game would drive a completionist kind of crazy. And normally I'm not at all. I don't care about that at all. But it's just that I want the build options that are there. I want to make all of the builds, as I guess you just saw. If there is one part of the game that I would highly encourage you do look up, like if you're not going to worry about getting absolutely everything, definitely look up where to get the different classes in the game. If you look nothing else up, make it that. This game has a quite robust multi-classing system that's, I would argue, a pretty core part of the game's experience, but very few classes are not extremely strangely hidden throughout the game. They're not that hard to get if you look them up, so I would highly recommend just biting the bullet and getting all of those. I think if you're interested in making builds in this game, you will be extremely happy that you did that. Just get that out of the way. I don't even think this is that amazing of an implementation of all of the good things about it. Like, we can go up from here to yet greater heights of cooperative build system excellence, if you like, but this taste of what's possible was pretty fantastic. And I think you get a ton of mileage out of the developer's proficiency with balancing all these weird options, such that they're at least somewhat compatible. There are a whole lot of odd yet effective little build possibilities, and it feels great that there's legitimate use for a ton of them. You can have a whole roster of builds and be swapping in and out depending on what fight's in front of you. I am happy to recommend Remnant 2, not to even mention its substantial DLCs, for solo play or co-op with 1 or 2 people. Next up is Chrono Ark. These 3 games are not in any particular order, by the way. This game is a great example of the difference between talking about games of the year, what a lot of folks are doing, and build systems of the year, this video. Chrono Ark would not receive a high score from me for almost anything other than its build system, but the build system is what I'm evaluating here, and I think it's fantastic. This is a party-based deck builder, so your team leader and each member of the team has their own deck, and they're all shuffled together in combat. And then each skill is shown with the portrait of the character who will do it if you cast it. So you can see those on the very left side next to the list of all the skills in my hand. And these effects are usually pretty straightforward on their own, but you're kind of playing 4.5 characters at once, so weaving together who does what when and using that order of operations to your advantage on the fly can be really fun. Enemy mechanics often call to this too, so maybe after you do 4 skills, that character will be stunned, the character that does the 4th skill, and so you want to sequence in a certain order. Just a few more things that were for me highlights. Lucy, your team leader, can basically always be upgraded to add more card draw to your deck, so that's kind of the 4.5. She's the half team leader character, and that element of deck builders then gets kind of solved out of the way card draw being game warpingly important in a lot of games where you draw through a deck, usually means that you have to value card draw above basically all else. Having it be that you always have a character where you can invest to get more card draw makes that give way to the more interesting decision. How much do you want? How much of your resources do you want to spend on card draw? Not, do you get lucky to get card draw? That is just a good solution for a problem that a lot of deck builders have. We've got overall razor-sharp balance that cuts through seemingly dominant strategies like a knife through butter if you keep an open mind, and just a lot of interconnected options. Almost all combinations of characters have more or less obvious, interesting little synergies you can lean into. And that's good because this game also features a lot of the improvisational flavored build making that I personally like a lot. Your team has 4 members, you might have noticed, and you choose 2, any 2 of your choice, at the start of a given run. So if I pick these 2, I can guarantee those synergies, and then I'm going to be given a random assortment of like 3 or 4 characters several times throughout the run to complete my team of 4. So there being interconnected synergies between the cast is important because you have a good amount of your team made at random. Well, semi-randomly. I think this is a really good thing. That gameplay loop where you start with a guaranteed pairing and then you semi-randomly get the rest of your team, and there are a lot of interconnected synergies, leads to finding all of those interconnected synergies, if they exist, and they do exist aplenty in this game. So that's both a basic build system structure thing done well, and it's also utilized very well by this game since it helps you find those synergies, and there are plenty to be found. I know I was harsh on the rest of the game a minute ago, but I enjoyed moments of the story. I do think that's one of the stronger other parts of the game, the story. I do think most of this game's boss fights, particularly the story ones, are absolutely phenomenal. I'm not going to show you any of those because it's a big spoiler. If you do enjoy this story, I think they're quite well narratively integrated too. That thing where good fight scenes tend to be about narrative tension, not just fighting to fight. This game does that well, in my opinion. I'll quickly mention that you get a few different forms of difficulty options. That's great. I have mixed feelings about this game's difficulty, but overall good. I mean, you can adjust it, so it's fine. About the only problem I see here is that you may just dislike other parts of the game. The one that's been on screen the most, for example, is that I think a lot of the art is kind of mismatched. Like, it doesn't have a single cohesive style exactly. It doesn't feel like most things quite fit into the world. I understand if that's why you aren't as excited to play this. But if you do really enjoy specifically making builds, I think you may have a pretty great time. I'll just also note that I personally dropped this game once, maybe an hour after I first tried it, knowing that what I've described to you in this section was waiting for me quite soon after I stopped playing would have gotten me back into it faster. So if you're feeling a little, I don't know, you're kind of on the edge, maybe give it a little bit more of a chance. I would just highly recommend putting quick progress mode on and just generally looking at this section. I think there's an interesting argument to be made for keeping this off or turning it on as well. Just look at that quick progress mode, especially that helped. Good luck and have fun. I've really had fun killing this, playing Chrono Ark. And I hope you do too. I don't remember this footage, but I think I'm about to die, so there we are, the last one of the year. My third and final slot for this video would be filled by Hades II. I think Hades II has the best overall build system I played in 2024, and thus I most highly recommend that you play it in 2025. But, well, you remember that snide comment I made earlier about how it's pretty beneficial to simply not focus on the very newest games? You'll get them cheaper, in a better technical state with less bugs, you get more time to choose if you actually want to play them or if they'll just be in your backlog for years. Yeah, putting it another way, Hades 2 is on here because I didn't play that many games that I thought had really good build systems this year. As I said at the top, it was a tough year for me, largely unrelated to doing this for a living. But the result is that I didn't play as many things as I'd like. And if I had, my personal philosophy is I would not have put this game on here this year. I normally think it's really great to wait until games are fully released, and I can help you do that by recommending games that are fully released. I almost never play things in early access, and made an exception for Hades 2, much more to see the development process. I learned a lot from following Hades 1 early access, and Supergiant's process has often been the exception to the rule that early access equals unfinished. This is a pretty complete game. You can go play Hades 2 now, and there's not really a problem with that. You get the idea. Here's what we're gonna do. I will officially be trying not to recommend especially recent games in these build systems of the year videos going forward, as I did with Baldur's Gate 3 last year, for example. Maybe I'll give them an honorable mention and then consider them for next year. And on that note, I will almost certainly be giving Hades 2 a slot in next year's video. Make no mistake, I was just saying if I'd played more games this year, I would have chosen to highlight those first, not that I think they would likely have been better than Hades 2, at least as good as I thought it was. If I play 3 build systems next year that I think are all better than Hades 2, I think we're going to have bigger things to worry about, or I guess nothing to worry about on this. But I think it's really, really good. I don't think it's just good in the absence of better stuff. I think it's exceptional in general. But we'll talk about it next year, and this year I am briefly going to talk about Hades 1. I'm going to give the slot to Hades 1 because before I started doing these videos, this was the highest rated build system on my list of games. To me, Hades 2 has largely power crept this design, but I still think it's really good at a lot of things, and I wanted to briefly talk about them. The reason for my high praise of this system is that it both gets the fundamentals down really well, in my opinion, and also has an interesting sense of balance, or just like a lot of interesting new kinds of pressure it puts on the player. So a couple of the basic mechanics of this game that are important to know about are the different Olympians. There's 8 different options in Hades 1 that will fill core Olympian slots, and in the background, the game quietly tracks how many of them you've seen in a given run. So here you can see that I have Ares's Doom condition on my special, those arrows bouncing around. That does damage after a short time. That's just what his special boon does, so whatever special attack your weapon has. Ares is now part of this run. I have 3 more slots to go. What the game is doing there is making sure that behind the scenes you get relatively focused boons. If you want to get Ares boons that take other Ares boons, you get a reasonable amount of Ares boons, but also not too many though. If you got a lot of them, it would be suddenly way easier to get those. Instead of way too hard, it would be way too easy. And likewise, you often need a sort of basic boon from 2 gods as a pair to get their powerful duo boon, some combo effect between them. But while it is reasonably difficult to quickly get a core boon from 2 specific gods you want, it's also easy enough that you sometimes will qualify for multiple gods' duo boons at once. So in this case, for example, I'm probably open to Ares' duo boon with Athena and Artemis, and so at some point I may get them. I believe I did get them later in this run. It's been really interesting following Hades 2 early access how they kind of quietly have been tinkering with that value. I bet in the patch notes a lot of people are seeing change the number of gods available in each run from, 5 to 4 like it was in Hades 1, and they're thinking, what is that? But I actually think it's one of the most important aspects of the game. It's one of the reasons that you can make these on-the-fly, semi-intentional builds reliably, just reliably enough, because they very, very carefully tuned that. And there's a kind of simple parts lead to complex actions thing that is a common theme in a lot of games that I think are really good. Supergiant generally has done this well. I think Pyre is a great example if that's a game that you would enjoy. I think that does this well, but in Hades you can see it in the way that boons fit into slots. Each of your basic attacks, your bow shot in the case of this bow, or the special, the little rain of 3 quick bouncing arrows, can have 1 boon attached to it, 1 core boon attached to it. And once you've got that, you can indirectly modify it, but you can't directly add more effects. Now that my little arrow volley has Doom on it, it cannot have, for example, Artemis's crit chance boon. It could indirectly gain other effects, like I could give Doom some other effect, or I could get a boon that gives everything crit chance. But the complexity of each individual action is kind of limited, and you have to find ways to fit more damage into your build's, I guess, rotation. Since I have Doom on those arrows and it does a lot of damage, it wouldn't be that valuable to do a lot of damage with a lot of other things as well, because I'd have to stop doing the arrow volley, if that makes sense. Oh, would you look at that? There it is, impending doom. So without going way too in-depth on this subject, that's where I think Hades' strong fundamentals begin. And what's so exciting to me about Hades 2 is that although I love the Supergiant catalog for going to new worlds, I kind of wanted to see that developer I really like make an entirely new world after Hades. With Hades 2, we got to see them iterate on this same design. It is largely the same as far as the structure of the game as Hades 1, but there are places where you can trim fat from this design, and it was really, really exciting already to see how that went. I'm quite excited to talk to you more about Hades 2 next year. Oh, so as we wrap up, I have something related to show you. This year, I started a big list of all of the games I've been playing, and I keep that open for you to browse. You can find recommendations in there. Some folks supporting me through my Patreon use this list to check what I've played recently before asking for a video on my Pantaloon Saloon channel about it. And it's a little transparency about what I'm doing. Why am I not showing you right now? There's a link in the description. You can look at this whenever you want. I also have it linked in my Discord if you ever need to find it. Again, just a simple thing that hopefully you can get some value out of. More to the point, for this video, I made a tab for build systems of the year. So here I just copy paste the section from the main part of the spreadsheet, and you've got a little collection of the build system of the year, I guess nominees, award slot winners, whatever you want to call them, that I do each year. Just to say that already it's pretty interesting to see some trends emerging. Like, I thought it was cool to see that so far the sort of format of game activity that I've evaluated as having a good build system hasn't been particularly one type or another. There's exactly 3 campaign, session, and ongoing, although Inscription, to be fair, is more of a campaign and then session kind of thing. And then also this category, roguelike or similar mode, is checked for 7 of the 9, and you could definitely make the argument for Remnant II. So yeah, what's going on with that? I have some thoughts about that. But for now, anyway, so that's where this is, and I'll talk about this more in an upcoming video. If you want to find it, it's in the description, or there's a link in one of my Toolshed channels in my Discord server. For now, what's up with all of the roguelike likes? Well, stay with me here. I'm talking about build systems, this one part of game design, here on this channel because I think it's very underexplored. The time is ripe for better build systems, but I'm not entirely seeing them. Almost all games that I think are really good, the build system is the weakest part. I finally played Nier Automata this year, and I thought almost every aspect of it was excellent except the build system, which I thought was kind of mediocre. That's fine. Not every game can or should fit a whole honkin' system in there, and a lightweight system is great if done well, but so often we have a big clunky thing that I think mostly makes a game worse, if not just more tedious. On the other hand, I think Chrono Ark is the very first game I've given a higher score for its build system than the game as a whole. No, that's not really a good thing about Chrono Ark, but nearly every game on that spreadsheet I showed you a minute ago has a lower build system score than how I felt about it overall, often a significantly lower score. So I guess the short answer to this question, why all the roguelikes then, is that the gaming industry as a whole isn't making a lot of experiences structured around making builds, using a build system quite actively rather than just one major time like in a lot of role-playing games. The gameplay structure, often called the modern roguelike, is, at least to me, the most obvious place, perhaps the only obvious place, where we currently find games about mixing and matching build elements often. Every run, things reset somewhat, so you're making a build every run. I mean, we also have things like Warframe and Remnant II, where you at least get a lot of benefit from having an arsenal of builds that you swap through a lot. Obviously, the pitfall to saying something like this is it's possible there are actually a lot of games that kind of counter that trend I'm pointing out, and I just don't know what they are. I'm just saying I have found almost nothing to the contrary of the trend that I've experienced, and it is kind of understandable. I mean, if you make a game for a large audience that requires constantly remaking your build, only relatively involved players will be able to enjoy that without it feeling overwhelming. It kind of makes sense why you wouldn't see a lot of major attempting to be commercially successful games trying to be full of you needing to remake your build. Like, that sort of makes sense, don't you think? But as the independent game scene continues to pop off and humanity in general gets more and more used to gaming, I'm absolutely confident that we will see more and more increasingly widely played build-focused game design. You'll recall that note I made earlier about Balatro's success being useful to keep in mind, but that's hardly the only supporting data point we've got. I personally think things are looking up. I think this is good news, in a way. That's my explanation for now. I think I've mostly found what I consider the most fun build systems in roguelike kind of gameplay loops so far, because build systems are still usually mismatched or under-refined within the games around them. We are still pre-build system is how I would think of it. Fortunately, I think we have nothing but the best ahead of us. In 2025, I'll begin doing my small part to change things. Thanks for joining me, folks. I've been Zandy, and if you'd like to stay aboard, well, where are we off to next?